the grain is going straight this way, so you want to go with the grain. Go that way. I think, and I can't believe it's been a lifetime of doing artwork, but one of the highlights of my career would be teaching.
My name is Da-ka-xeen Mehner. I teach and I'm the director of the Native Arts Center at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. I like to think of the center as a safe place for development, a place to explore and find your own personal voice as an artist.
I would say the medium that I use is seal and sea otters and hand skin sewing. The fur, they're from animals that I hunt myself, and I feel that my art is the entire process of asking those animals for their life, doing Yupik ritual to give thanks and respect to those animals, and processing the hides and sewing them and making garments out of them.
I'm Kuna, Marjorie Tahbone, and I'm from Nome, Alaska, and I am Inupiaq. I am sharing how to make and design qupak, which is our Inupiaq traditional fancy pattern designs that are traditionally put on our fancy parkas. So it's a practice that we don't see too often, but it's something that I feel is very important to maintain and pass on.
So the grant, To Be Continued and Remembering and Sharing Alaska Native Arts, was started in 2012. And it was a program where a philanthropy group came and spoke with us and looked at what we did as a programming in the department or within the center. And they wanted to support what we were doing. And so the concept of this grant was to take the workshop model that was in the Native Arts Center, of bringing in an artist to teach their specialty, and bring it out to the rural campuses and service centers within UAF. To date, we've had about 1,700 participants in our workshops. We've had 128 workshops since then. Just an incredible program to have that kind of support and that kind of recognition on how important these art forms are to share and perpetuate and teach, and to be able to share them with the next generation.
So this is down in Kenai at the Kanaitsi Indian Tribe Educational Fishery Site, and this is how my family does fish. Yagalidu, Joel Isaac Shiiji. Hello, how are you? My name is Joel Isaac. It's exciting to see the resurgence of fish skin. And to me, the more people that are working in fish skin, the better. It's easier if you pull the yellow all the way through before you pull your other thread. And then you're not, oh, it came out. So just thread your needle real fast. The tricky thing about doing a workshop in a short period of time is there's so many directions you can go with fish skin. So I was giving a lot of advice, or if you're gonna try this method, you might see this. Other people might teach you these things. This is my perspective. This is the things that work for me. I'm not saying that other people are wrong. I'm just saying this is how I do it. So, but in the studio, we're working with the headed and gutted fish from the store. We start out by skinning the fish. We removed all the fins as we skinned, and then scraping off the meat and the fat from the skin. The main objective of this first step is to leave as much meat and fat on the fish as possible, because you're not wasting the food part of it. After that, we wash it really well with Dawn dish soap. The blue kind seems to work the best. What we did in this workshop is we mixed a tanning solution of glycerin and rubbing alcohol and soaked it over a space of about 24 hours. What that does is it makes the skins really translucent and a little bit more flexible without any mechanical softening. And really it comes down to it, you're trying to prevent decay and preserve and in some ways like hydrate or condition the skin to create it in a stable state. After about 24 hours, we took them out and kind of just wiped off with paper towel that upper superficial layer of the glycerin rubbing alcohol solution and laid it flat out on a table to let it start to dry. We cut out denim scrap pieces of fabric and we practiced and I taught them to do the watertight stitch. You can see how I'm kind of holding this where it has tension in all directions so that I can move and I go under, over, and then through the loop. And really the watertight stitch, as we talked about in the workshop, it's a like hand serging where you're using 2 threads. One's a running stitch and one's a couching stitch. I don't require in all my workshops the students to use the watertight stitch, but I want them to try it. I want them to do it because passing on that information to as many people as possible is really important. And that is the agreement that I've made with the elders who have given the time and their knowledge to pass it on to me. They want it to be dispersed, and it keeps it from dying. I've been spending a lot more time looking at the material culture, and now I'm kind of switching gears to see how language comes alongside that. And it really makes the language come alive, and it makes translating so much easier when it's like, yeah, this is, when I'm trying to explain how fish skin feels, there's a verb for it. And it's like, the English words just aren't there, but there's a Dena'ina word for it. And then, yes. And then if you put our 2 words we practice together.
You know, for myself, about what this term of Native art or Indigenous arts comes from. And I think really when it boils right down to its core, I define it as art within a cultural context. And then it's up to every artist to define that context that they draw upon and why that's important and where that comes from.
The process is we use calf skin, which is made out of cow. Traditionally would be caribou with the light and dark colors, bleached sealskin and alder-dyed sealskin. And they typically would be geometric shapes, and they would be cut out into whatever shape that the artist designed. Yeah, you can get started at a corner or at a center here and work your way around. I would probably get started at a center. Typically, it was the most intricate designs were generally the way you could tell if you had a highly skilled seamstress. And so it was the extremely fancy geometric qupak designs that really showed the wealth of that family. The needlework, the seamstress, the skills that the seamstress has to do is very important. You know, you have to have nice, tight stitches, and they need to be uniform, and they need to lay in a certain way so that none of the wind can come through the parka. And if you want, you could always pull it on, since you got it through on one side, you could pull it through and then try to get on the other side too. That was a sign of a great seamstress if they're able to make those nice tight stitches. One of my friends, his mother, loves to make qupacs, and she has her pride is that she can make nice, tight, skinny qupacs with intricate patterns on her sewing machine. And so it's still another sign of how skilled a seamstress is by how intricate her qupak is, even if it's out of fabric. And so I think that's something that is just a testament to how we still evolve and we adapt and we change through our environment and what we have available to us as far as materials.
My classes are pretty much mask making. I consider mask making something that anyone can do and bring their own character to their piece, such as something meaningful to them or something personal. And the other thing about this mask is the ribbons come from the stick dance ceremony. And the stick dance ceremony takes place in Nulato and Caltag. And it's a week-long ceremony. That's what I teach, and that's what I've always taught for the last, I don't know, 30-some years, I suppose. But we start out with a piece of block, and usually my favorite wood is basswood. It's a very soft wood. It's not the prettiest wood, but it's a soft wood, and I like to teach in that because you don't get as frustrated with, like, say, doing a hardwood. And it's easy to carve. To me, it's like butter. because the class has to be so fast, I have to do it really fast. And by the end of the class, the first day, you should have your piece cut out, even though you don't know what your design might be, but at least have a shape going. And then like maybe cut this out so that every time when you open it, it'll be there. And you carve a little bit and just put this back on.
Okay.
That's one way to do it. It's a few days of designing. I usually use acrylics. My favorite colors are the more the earthy colors, the red oxides, the yellow oxides. After painting, that's when I say putting the bling on. What I like to use are bullet shells, tacks, brass tacks, found objects, mirrors, hair. I encourage people to use their own hair to put on their piece to make it more personal. Now you're going to put your name and then copyright, the date, the title, all on the back.
Okay.
And the materials, all the materials used. Actually, and what is another important thing about teaching mask making is titling a piece. To me, I think that's very important, no matter how little you are or how old you are.
I brought these in to give you an example of sizes of the patterns. And so this hat is my small size. Teaching what in Alaska is called the trapper hat. Molokai is another, it's like what Yupik refers to that style. Kind of the Elmer Fudd kind of style hat. I've also labeled where the fur flow is going. This is going to be placed on the skin side of the animal. And so I have the arrow of the fur flow going down. Fur flows from head to tail. There was enough funding to make an entire fur outer cover out of beaver, and then also like the ear flaps, which is a significant amount of fur. So it was nice to be able to do that. If you can squeeze 3 patterns on each one is what you want to do, because you're going to be making 2 patterns of this, one of here, 2 of the covers, 1 of here. And then if you leave this 2 for this part later. So when you're sewing, you want to make your stitching to be as smooth and even as possible. His stitches right here are really nice. They're even in the width, they're even in his depth, and so that's going to produce a nice seam. He's also doing a good job of keeping the fur out of the seam, which is also going to make a nicer smooth seam. And then also he's pulling and taking out the slack out of his stitching, which is going to make a nice seam. I really appreciate being able to hand sew. I don't quite get the fur sewing machine, but I really like the cathartic nature of sewing fur by hand. It's been great too to see students really enjoying that, and we had an option kind of for time-wise to use sewing machines for the fabric and the hat, because you need to have a fur sewing machine to sew fur, but you can use a regular fabric sewing machine for the liner. And students have elected to sew that by hand. I guess I also feel that in classes I've done before is kind of again about holding space for conversation and for being able to explore other things other than the actual craftsmanship of making something, but often to have dialogues about respect and other things that we go through, which I also think is rather conducive to like sewing, you know, a group of sewing and sitting down and sharing. But I feel that that environment is already created within the Native Arts program.
I guess I encourage people to think of the Native Arts program as their place. You know, we'll have students that come in and start their day by making coffee and then going off to their other classes. And then we have other students that stay late into the night working away on their stuff. But I guess I like to think of it as a little village within the university structure. I'd like to think that we were able to cultivate a safe learning environment for people to experiment and share and learn from each other within that space.
Look how much she's done today.
Nice. Nice.
But there's nothing to date that really shows Athabascan art form, except maybe their clothing. We're pretty much nomadic people, so there's nothing really to draw on for inspiration. At first, I was kind of concerned about, oh, well, what are people going to think of this? It's not this or it's not that. It's, you know, what is it? But I've just continued, and this is where it's gotten me. And it's titled as Blueberries for Ita, which means blueberries for mother. And to me, I feel like I am at a point to where, because I know nothing, I can do whatever I want to do.
I learned from my mother. We have a family design that my great-grandmother designed when she was alive. So when I was younger, we were fortunate enough to have a fancy parka that had started by my great-grandmother, and it needed to be finished. And so me, my mother, and my grandmother got together and we sewn the squirrel skins together and the fancy qupak. All right.
So I first learned the technique from books, is the way that I describe it. And so I started reading about leather tanning and going through ethnographies and anthropological journals and PhD dissertations on Eskimo skin sewing, as it's called, and tried to do what was in those books. Like that, and then pull off. Sometimes these bones are sharp. And I worked with an elder, Helen Dick, who's from Lime Village in the Dena'ina area. And I showed her what I was doing, and I was like, am I doing this correctly? She's like, you're doing it right. If anything, I was over scraping the skins.
So which is okay?
That one's okay, that one's not.
I'm hesitant to say I'm self-taught because that knowledge just didn't appear, you know? I'm gonna put some knots around the parachute. I read books and I would talk to people who I would deem as experts, both in the hunting aspect and tanning aspect, like how to take care of an animal. You can like test it on the side. How I learned would get pieces and here and there and experiment on my own and show someone what I did and go, what do you think? And then be, oh, do this, this, and that. Or,
I think my mom has some, for sure.
Back of the ear
Uh-huh.
that I want to get before I carve it.
I started carving, and quite by accident really, was in the late 70s, I think it was 78. And then there was a lot of pipeline money going around for all kinds of things. So the university and the Native Arts Center did a workshop and brought in all these very well-known carvers from around the state. And I just happened to be enrolled that semester. And so I was with this workshop for 2 weeks and did my first mask. And all those people there encouraged me to continue carving.
My first pair of boots, I made them, I used fish skin as thread, and I didn't wear them. I can put them on my feet, but I didn't really wear them. My second pair of boots I made in graduate school.
So these were my 2 years worth of grad school working. And the soles are rated for about 5,000 miles until you get through the tread. So I've walked quite a bit on these. So because people ask like how
I wore them as work boots. The soles of them were rubber, and they're rated for about 5,000 miles, and I wore out the tread.
Well, you know, I'm still young. I would consider myself intermediate. I'm nowhere near an advanced or master at this particular craft. But for me, being able to share what I've learned from my grandmother and my mother and kind of show some technique and at least how to design. For me, it feels like I'm kind of the transfer of knowledge from one generation to the next. Make it fit. And the final, on Wednesday, what we'll do is we'll go through a process where we'll stretch them out so they lay flat. So when you sew them together, they'll be a little crinkly and rough, but that's okay. I feel as a young person growing up, you know, we're inundated with all of these negative stereotypes of who we are as Indigenous people of Alaska. And from that, I had a passion and desire to really prove them wrong, and also to show the members of our community that we can still have our language, we can still practice our traditional skills and techniques, and still live in this world that has been considered living in two worlds. And you know, that concept I never really liked, because I feel like we're just living in this one world and we're trying to navigate how we can be strong Indigenous people and yet still be a part of the economy and social systems that are in place.
Making that culture still relevant and being celebrated and practiced today is a huge gift that I get. You know, it's a gift that I'm giving, but it's a gift to give it, to help keep that alive. Working with marine mammals and working with animals is so much a part of who we are. And so being able to see that being received and celebrated and practiced by other people, like, that's huge. Like, it just, yeah, I guess it gives me that peace.
Thinking about the value of the Native Arts Center, you know, I think it's this place that really shows the university's commitment to Indigenous creativity and Indigenous knowledge within the academic system, and this value of being able to teach, and not to say we need validation from entities, but it is this validation that you can get a degree in Native Arts, that it is just as valuable as a degree in painting or sculpture. And it shows a commitment not only to our past as Indigenous people in Alaska, but a commitment to the future and passing on these forms to the future generations.
And there are actually more elders who know how to do it than originally I was told or I thought that there were. And so now there actually are quite a few people that have either seen it as kids or have done it, and they haven't sewed this way in 60 years, but they know how to do it. And they're like, oh yeah, you're doing it right. They want their knowledge to go to future generations. So that's part of the research methodology of how do you, this Indigenous ways of knowing, how do you pass these on? And really that compensation is passing it on to other people.
I know it's not the easiest lifestyle to choose art as a way of living, but I also think that if you have it, you gotta do it. And it's in you. It's in your blood, it's in your mind, thoughts. So continue on.